Good morning, everyone. Morning, guys. We are doing the Landlord Lingo Buster Part 2. So Jim and I done the Part 1 a couple of weeks ago. So this is Part 2, which is mid-tenancy checks, rent reviews, tax talk, and we're going to look at how to get your property back if you're in that position and you need to
That's
do
a
that.
quick hello to everybody on TikTok and everybody on Instagram. If you get a chance, please feel free to ask questions and comment as well. We will get them at the end. And the same with Facebook and same with Twitter, and we've got YouTube and we've got LinkedIn joining us as well. So we're all on these different streams. So if you've got any questions, please feel free to ask these questions. We will cover them at the end, though. The show typically, typically lasts about an hour because there's a lot of good content to get through here.
Yeah.
We don't do wee tiny shows or anything like that. We've got a lot to share.
Yeah.
And it's key instrumental things which will actually help you in your wealth creation and your buy-to-let business. I had a wee think when I was running this morning. Wow, blew my mind. The things I was thinking. It's like, wow, the future's bright. I've got to wear shades. That's a song somewhere. I can't mind. If anybody knows who sang that song, please feel free to put it in the comments. I'd be interested to know. I can't remember who it was. Anyway, over to you, Richard.
Picking up from the Part 1, obviously, we covered quite a lot of content in that. And so obviously we're at the point now, obviously, you've moved your tenant in, you've protected their deposit. We talked about banking it and protecting it in a scheme. You've got your first month's rent in the bank. So we're going to talk about what comes next and the next part of that journey and the letting the property and managing it properly. If you want to look at the first the Part 1, you'll get it on all the channels and things. The link's in the post here to the first show, so you could click through and watch that Part 1.
For live on Instagram and TikTok, you can just go straight to our website, fifeproperties.co.uk. We've got a blog there, and all that information that we're about to discuss in previous show as well is in these blogs.
Yeah.
You could also watch these shows previously as well on the YouTube channel on Fife Properties TV. That's all you need to put in at Fife Properties TV, and we'll come up straight away. Again, Richard, I can't impress enough how much content we're actually giving away every single time. And I think a lot of people actually, because it's like, I can't be bothered. It's like, I didn't really want to spend an hour listening to this and all the rest of it. But the reality is, it's your wealth we're talking about. It's your future we're talking about. It's your children and your grandchildren's future as well. Because if you build a big enough legacy, that'll go to them as well. And this is what we talk about. And this is my big thing about leaving something for the next generation. They are going to be absolutely skint by the time they retire. The government's going to take everything away from them, by the way. We're at 3.7% unemployment, a record low employment. We've got our highest employment ever since 1971. Where do you think the government is going to get extra money to spend on their resources? They're not going to get it for employing more people and generating more tax because we're already full. They'll have to get it from raising more taxation. So it's going to bite even harder, more than likely. Or they're going to have to get back with a proper immigration policy and actually get more people to work in the country in order to generate more tax to do that as well for growth. That's the two things, the two drivers that will drive this forward as a business, in a business sense. And this is why it's so important to actually plan now for the future. And your planning will be your children's planning, will be your grandchildren's planning, your great-grandchildren's planning, and your further community planning as well. That's what this is all about. Anyway, Richard, sorry, steal your thunder.
No, you're fine. I totally agree, Jim, and I think you'll notice yourself, obviously, a lot of the interaction that we get and the main people that we interact with through these shows are really successful people and people that I work with in building their portfolios, and that they're all on the same mindset. So, I mean, like you say, people might think, no, I've not got an hour to listen to that. Well,
we'll spend more time.
We can't afford not
planning in a book, trying to bloom and get our next holiday. Then we'll actually sit and listen to this, something that will generate wealth for you, which will actually buy you another holiday easily. But no, we'll spend all our time trying to work out when we're getting our next holiday. We'll also spend all our time in working out how we're going to scrimp and save all the rest of our life. No. The key here is not to try and save the money, and more or less people cut in. They end up trimming off the fat. Right, this is a good example. People end up trimming off the fat. But what they don't realise, when they're trimming off the fat of their cost and their investments and their budget and their household budget, they end up cutting into the bone because they can't trim anymore. So if you can't trim anymore, the only thing to go for is more income, sales, and how to generate more sales. This is what we talk about every single time. So this could be, the biggest snooze fest ever, but I'm going to be talking about some things which will generate these sales at the same time as this. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, Richard.
Yeah. No, that's fine. So part 2, Jim, we could just sit and we'll just let you talk for an hour. You'd be able to. But anyway, part 2 is all about the effective management and how to keep everything running smoothly and legally and profitable and things as well. So obviously, for example, like regular inspections, health and safety laws, claiming all your tax allowances and reviewing the performance of your investment. And these are all the foundations of being a successful landlord and investor. And while serving notice right away is essential to get your property back when you want it, you need to obviously do that properly. So that's something we're going to look at today as well. So there's a lot to get through. And whether you're a landlord in Fife or even elsewhere in the UK, because we're going to cover obviously Scottish and English law and things today. Our Jargon Buster today is here to ramp up your knowledge and boost your confidence in what you're doing. So without further ado, let's dive in.
Can I just jump in for 2 seconds? As soon as you say mid-tenancy inspections, it's snooze fest. It's like, it is, isn't it? Yeah. But what you don't realise out of mid-tenancy inspections is it actually catches things that you need to do earlier in terms of preventative maintenance.
Yeah.
And the key here is about prevention's better than cure, because cure will cost you a lot more money.
Yeah.
So everything that we talk about in here sounds like a snooze fest sometimes, but the reality is it comes down to brass tacks, which is profit. And I can't, anybody out there that denies the fact that you need profit to run anything is delusional or skint. Probably skint, more than likely.
Yeah, but I mean, mid-tenancy inspections, they are important. Kieran's joining us this morning because, Kieran, you are very well versed in inspections and how to carry them out and the value in them and doing them and protecting the asset and your investment and things. So, Kieran, why do you not let us run through what your take on mid-tenancy inspections?
So mid-tenancy inspections are such a key thing. Like you say, sometimes it can be a little bit of a snooze, but if you think about it, that your property is your investment and you should check on your investments. So why are you not doing mid-tenancy inspections? You want to keep your eyes on it, make sure it's being looked after, make sure that your tenants aren't having any issues as well. So these are obviously some of the things that we'll cover in today for it.
Yeah.
So as well as health checks and safety laws to stick to, when your tenants move in, you should also make regular visits to the property during the tenancy. So typically we would advise between 3 months to 6 months. It's good to be doing a bit more regular checks at the start of a tenancy to make sure things are running smoothly. And once you've built up that trust with the tenant and you know that they're looking after it, you've got a long-term tenant in there that you're happy with, you could look to reduce that perhaps to 6 months. So obviously this is something that we advise doing on a regular basis, because even between those 3 months, a property can change drastically from that.
Yeah, a lot could happen in that space of time, yeah.
So
I actually used to get caught out with this all the time. Obviously, just so everybody understands my background, I've been doing this for 30 years and I started off doing everything myself in the very beginning. So I know from the core of what it takes to actually begin as a buy-to-let landlord investor and what you need to do. We're having to do it all yourself, and then how to build a system to sustain the scalability of what you want to do in your investment strategies. And this is one of the key areas here I neglected in the beginning. And there was often a lot of times I would have to go down because I would have to get their rent back on track. So I would actually sit down with people and have a discussion with them. But at the same time, then what they used to do is go, by the way, I've got a list
of
everything that's wrong with the house. Yeah. And I'm like, okay, so when did you know about this stuff? Oh, it's been like that for the last year. It's like, oh my God. It's like, and then you'd walk into a room and the side of the corner of the room was like all damp down the wall where the defective gutter, the gutter had become defective for the OJ joint.
Yeah.
The seal had broken, and then it ran down the cavity and into the actual soaked through the wall itself. I'm like, did you never think about any time of actually phoning me and telling me about this so I could actually get it rectified before it actually caused a real problem? Well, it just wasn't that bad. And that's the reality. People do not think like you.
No.
We'll have to accept that. They don't have that. For me, it's like high standards and then even higher. Just think about that. You guys know that anyway. But for other people, it's like, it doesn't bother me that much. It's not really that much a hassle. Couldn't care less. When I see them, I'll say something to them about it if it's convenient. And that's the only time they would tell me, maybe about a year down the line, when it had got far worse. And yet, if I'd caught it in the beginning, it would have been a few £100s. And the next minute, I've got to sort a gutter, and then I've got to get the whole thing stripped off by the damp course person. They've got to put a membrane on, they've got to replaster it, and then I've got to decorate the room. Several thousand later.
A couple of thousand.
This is why mid-tenancy inspection checks are really important, Karen, isn't it?
They are. So these periodic inspections, they are essential for spotting maintenance issues. And like you say, prevention is better than having to deal with the repercussions of something that would have been a simple repair escalating to the point where you are having to spend thousands on fixing it.
What happens with things like your rights to, access the property to actually do this?
Oh, don't worry, Jim, we're going to cover that.
Perfect.
But these inspections are key for obviously picking up maintenance issues. They're also great for building up a relationship with your tenant. So if you are in an instance where your tenant is suffering from rent arrears, maybe their income's had an effect, their hours have been cut at work, they're perfect for having built up that relationship to be able to go out and speak to them. We've had tenants in the past that have maybe got some issues going on at the property or having issues with their rental account, and we'll just say, that's fine. Your property's due for an inspection. We'll come out and do that and speak to you about it at the same time. And sometimes it can be a lot easier to resolve things in person rather than emails or phone calls. So having that relationship where they do feel comfortable with you coming out and discussing that with them.
Emails can cause a real problem, can't they, in communication? It's amazing. And text as well. It's amazing how many, and we just know this in our day-to-day lives, and everybody out there will know that as well. You know, the misinterpretation that somebody can get from a message through Messenger, through WhatsApp, through a text, through an email, is astronomical in comparison to what a face-to-face conversation can have. Then, if that's the case, then how do you approach that? Then how do you get face-to-face with someone that doesn't want to talk to you?
Sometimes it is just having to be a bit persistent. You do have to watch between crossing the line between obviously trying to keep up contact and resolve something as opposed to harassing somebody. So there is quite a fine line between the two. So obviously if we have tenants that we've tried to make contact with a couple of times and they're just not getting back to us, we'll send them out a letter and say, look, this is when we're coming. If there's any issues with it, this is our number to get in contact. If not, we'll see you at this date and time for it.
Yeah, and is that really a good response sometimes? Is that, do you get a good response rate for that?
It is. Obviously, I used to do between 40 and 60 inspections a month. So I didn't have time to be constantly trying to chase up people to get their dates. Obviously, I would give them a call, drop them a text if I couldn't get them. Quite often than not, we don't tend to get most tenants on the phone in the first place. So dropping them a text is usually a bit more responsive. But I mean, people are busy with work and everything, but they're quite happy. Like if they've got that, right, this is when we're coming. It's like, right, okay, that's when I know they're coming out, rather than trying to, if they're too busy to try and sort something. And then obviously if that doesn't suit them, they've got our number there that they can give us a call and rearrange it. So I wouldn't waste too much time trying to book in inspections with somebody that has no intention of getting back to you. Sometimes it is easier to say, this is when we're coming. If you have an issue, please contact us, after you've had a couple of initial attempts of it though.
Yeah, that's where I think arranging inspections and getting the access, I think that's when the relationship, if you've got a good relationship with your tenants, it makes it so much easier to set that up, and they're willing to let you come, and there's no that reluctance to like not let you through the door or let you set a time and date. That relationship is really key to that. But
that's maybe as well why it's important just to keep in touch with them in general terms.
Yeah.
Rather than actually, it's the classic example about you're teaching them every time this guy phones me, he's always got something negative or something something uncomfortable I don't want to talk about. So what they do is they learn over a period of time. There's every time you're going to talk to them, it's going to be something that's uncomfortable. So therefore they run away from it, and that's why they don't really want to contact you, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, to touch base on a positive note rather than always something negative is really important. But let's break down the actual tenancy check procedure, because there's obviously there's a correct way to do it. Karen, let's look at the different parts of that to be kind of successful in setting up and carrying out.
Yes, so obviously if you're looking to do periodic inspections at the property, you have to have a periodic inspection clause within the tenancy agreement. So this will be even just a little line just to say that obviously access will be required for inspections during the tenancy. When we're doing move-ins, this is something, although it's in their tenancy agreement, I always highlight to a tenant, because let's face it, not everybody reads every single bit of their tenancy agreement. So when you're doing a move-in with somebody, make it clear that this is something that you'll be coming out to do, but you will give them a call and arrange access with them that's suitable for both yourself and them as well.
Yeah.
So when you're going around, obviously it can be a little bit overwhelming when you go into a property. You've got lots of different rooms to check, lots of different factors to have a look at as well. So taking an inspection checklist can be an essential part to that. So it's ensuring that you don't miss anything, and you can also get one from the Landlord Vision website if you are struggling.
Do you think that then leads from the original condition report and just checking that, you know, because you should really do we know that, well, we would advise, obviously, you should do a condition report before the actual tenant moves in, so you know the exact condition of the property. Do you think that's maybe the good checklist to take round then, just a copy of that and just check everything again?
It can be, obviously, inventories can be quite extensive, and it could probably be a little bit overwhelming if you were trying to compare every single little thing from that. But if you are a good agent, landlord, you know what your property was like before somebody moved in. And if you're not sure, then you do have that inventory report to refer back to, which your tenant should also have a copy of as well. Obviously, you are going to get little bits of wear and tear over time, especially if you've got a family or somebody that's been in for a long time. You're going to get the odd little bit. So you do have to be prepared for this. You cannot expect to have the property back in pristine condition. Thankfully, there's some tenants that will give you it back like that, but you do have to allow for fair wear and tear throughout a tenancy.
Yeah, we just got one back, and I was in it the other day, and I said to you, I was like, God, I wouldn't even have thought they even lived in it. It's like still pristine.
There's some fantastic. I mean, you know, it's just down to the person, really. I mean, we can't really say they're tenants. They're just, that's just a name. But there's some fantastic people out there that look after your property, and when it's returned, it's often better than what it was before. And I'm amazed. It's really good. And but the usual thing is, there is an expectation from a lot of investors. It's like, well, I handed you the property like that. I want it back exactly like that. But there is clauses in the Safe Deposit Scotland, you know, with the adjudication system, where they actually say you've got to deduct fair wear and tear, isn't it?
Yeah, of course. And what about the inspection report itself, Kim?
So obviously taking a report itself, so you should be making a record of obviously if you find any issues in the property. Obviously with ourselves, when we're doing one, if there's anything that we notice that's different, we will take a photo of it as well, so we can put that in with the report. And we obviously send that over to our landlord so they can see exactly how their property is. Ideally, we like to send one that is no issues seen or reported throughout, but they're not all like that. So if there are any new issues or any suspicious looking little marks on the walls, possibly coming from leaks, it's always good to take a photo of them. So if you're going back and this is something that's gotten a little bit worse, you have a record of what it's been like before. Obviously, I would be highlighting anything like that to a tenant as well, just to say, look, you need to keep an eye on this and see if it is something new or if it is something historic. So you're obviously getting to the bottom of that.
That's where it's worth taking a ruler or taking maybe a coin out of your pocket and actually just putting it next to whatever it is, just so it gives it perspective as to how big that is. Because if you see something on a wall and you just take a photograph of it, you don't actually. Well, is it 6 inches wide, or is it just 1 inch wide, or you know? So giving it some sort of perspective with a tape measure or a ruler, or maybe something like
what we usually do is a pen. A pen's quite a good one.
Yeah.
We usually do that with inspections, but yeah, I mean, I think the inspection report is really important, and I think, but it's all very well doing inspections and the report and that, but I think the important thing as well is also calls to action on things that do need addressed. So that you need to follow through on that. It's all very well doing inspection, but you need to kind of do your follow up after that. I think it is, even though it is important. Sorry, what were you going to say, Karen?
Yeah, and obviously just even if you're picking up things, highlighting it, as we said, to a tenant, making them aware if there's anything that you need to be doing, that you'll perhaps be attending the property to address, or if there's anything a tenant needs to be doing. Mold is the biggest one that I come across. I feel like an expert on it now. But making sure if the tenant is suffering from issues of condensation, that you're making them aware of how to deal with that. That's something that is key to be looking at in an inspection, because if they are not attending to it in the initial stages, if when those first little speckles appear, if that's not getting attended to, it's just going to grow. And the amount of tenants that I've seen that are not aware of the situation surrounding it and how it's caused, and they just let it spread across their wall, it's ridiculous. When a simple mold and mildew spray,
we can give advice. Most mold if it's black spot, it's caused by poor ventilation. That's all it is. And it's in our normal duties of our tenant duties under the legislation that a tenant is supposed to, you're supposed to wipe this up and clean it. You don't just leave it and just let it get worse. So just a bit of advice out there for tenants, actually, because at the end of the day, it will come back to haunt you in the fact that the landlord will have repercussions and be able to claim that back from you, because that then goes into the grounds of neglect more than anything. So just a wipe down with a bleach and a cloth, just to wipe it down and so it's away. You would do that in your own house. So why would you not do it in a rental property? No, it's the landlord's. It's the landlord that's to do that. It's like, no, it's the tenants to do that because it's your wear and tear. The classic example of that as well, and I'll just going one step further, is you give the tenant a property and the toilet is perfect, it works fine. The next minute you get a phone call from the tenant saying the toilet's blocked. And it's like, so how did it block? Oh, well, my wee kid was putting a toilet thing down, a toilet roll down the toilet, and it went up the pipe and it was blocked. Okay, so that's your responsibility. That's not the landlord's responsibility. But it's amazing how many people out there would actually think, no, that's the landlord's responsibility. No, that's you that did it. You got it unblocked when you got it. You actually caused the problem and damaged it. So you have to rectify it. So just to be clear about that, it's a wee bit more of a further example of the extension of the mold thing. So everybody's clear of it. Anyway,
some weird and wonderful things. Some weird and wonderful things that have been found down toilets over the years. But anyway.
I know.
But yeah, I mean, the importance of inspections, definitely. And I think it's always good to remember that even though you are entitled to inspect your rental property, you must give the tenant plenty of notice, minimum 24 hours. You cannot enter the property without obviously their consent. And the inspection does always need to be at a reasonable time of the day, which means no spontaneous midnight visits. Or, do you know what I mean? At silly times.
I'll tell you what, I've heard it in the past where I've had my friends have even been tenants of some landlords where they just used the key and walked into the property, and I'm like, you're having a laugh. They just walked in. Yeah, they just walked in and says, "How you getting on, guys?" Thinking that was okay to do. So
I've had a new landlord as well that'll be like, "Oh, I'll just pop round and say hi," and I'm like, "That's fine, but let me know when you're going so I can inform the tenants." I'm like, "Please do. You cannot just go and turn up at your property. Unfortunately, this is not. Although you are the owner, this is not your home anymore. So you have to let tenants know when you're going around. You can't just have unexpected."
Just further on from that, when you say that, Karen, a top tip for landlords: if you've got a letting agent looking after your property and you decide to go around and say hi to the tenant, please don't.
Yeah.
Because if you introduce yourself to the tenant and tell them that you're the landlord, you'll start a three-way conversation. And then when it doesn't go right and you're trying to resolve the situation, the tenant then uses and plays you off against the letting agent and gives you two different stories. Oh, the letting agent's not doing this for him, the letting agent's not doing that for him. When the letting agent is doing that for you, and you get caught in the middle of this three-way conversation, and it becomes two against one, and then that's the end of everything.
Yeah, you have letting agent for a reason. If you're doing that, please
that counts when you're doing repairs as well. So if you're doing repairs because you decide to do your own repairs because you're a contractor as well, and you've got a letting agent looking after it and you're doing your own repairs, then when you go around and do the repairs, don't announce that you're the landlord. Just say you're the contractor there to sort the problem. If there's anything wrong with the property and you see that, then go back to your letting agent and inform them there is a problem with the property, but don't you announce that there and then say, why are you not getting that sorted? What's that problem there? Because that will not go down well at all. And you've got a letting agent there for a reason, to make sure it runs properly and make sure the tenant actually adheres to the legislation, plus the fact that to make sure you adhere to the legislation. Because it's amazing that the landlords and investors don't realise there's over 170 pieces of legislation governing a rental property in the way it's all done. Anyway, I rest my case. Let's come on to successful rent reviews then. What do we do about that, Richard?
Rent reviews, and obviously the blog is set up with rent reviews for Scotland and England, and how it should be without the current situation that we're in Scotland at the moment with the rent freeze. And obviously we've got come the 1st of April, as we all may know, just to keep you up to date, we can start to implement rent reviews from the 1st of April, only to the level of 3% or 6%, 6% if we make an application to the rent services and things.
So what should be that typical process then?
Yeah, so I mean, rent checks can be a bit of a touchy subject, obviously, particularly with the rising costs of living and things at the moment. But a rent review isn't only about rent, it's about keeping your competitive in the local market as a sustainable investment, which ultimately it is. And the typical procedure, obviously, well, annual rent checks. So if you've got a good managing agent, they will review your property every year and advise you whether or not you should be rising the rent, using evidence of nearby comparable properties for rent, and obviously looking at the market and the area. They should also suggest any upgrades that you need to make that will increase the popularity of your property and its performance, and ultimately its longevity as an investment as well.
Now, annual rent reviews is nothing I've ever really bothered about myself, but because of the impending legislation that's come in place for the Scottish Government, therefore it's forced me in a position where we're probably going to have to do annual rent reviews for that. So you could, all your tenants out there tuning in, you could thank the Scottish Government for me putting my rents up when I usually don't do it, because I have no choice, because if they keep this rent freeze or this rent cap in place, and then it comes to a point where I do have to increase rents substantially because of that, then I'm going to be out in a limb, and I'm not going to be able to do certain things. So that's why I have to do it, because I don't know when the Scottish Government's going to change their mind, or their erratic decisions and behaviour are going to lead to something else. That's
I think you hit the nail on the head there, Jim, with that, because for the years that I've done this, rent reviews were never a big thing. Like, there was the odd one that a tenant had been in it for years, and obviously the rent was a lot lower than it typically would have been, so we would do it, but it was never this big thing. But because of the way the Scottish Government of obviously the rise in interest rates and obviously the uncertainty for landlords, it has now highlighted, really, I think it's very much put rent increases in the spotlight, and it's becoming much more of a thing now.
The English Government's going to try and go the same way. And I'm thinking, you're daft. It's like we did landlord registration, and then the English Government looked at that and went, "We're not doing that." It's like, well, after they were actually on the way to do it at the same time, and they then stopped in their tracks because they realised all the hassle, and it wasn't actually achieving anything. It wasn't actually stopping anyone. It wasn't actually getting any landlords out of the market that are rogue landlords, are like really bad slum landlords, we would call them. It didn't. It was a sledgehammer to crack a nut, and then the English Government went, "This doesn't make sense at all. This is just another piece of draconian legislation and another bureaucratic level put on landlords for no reason at all, and it won't solve the real problem. Is how do we tackle slum landlords?" Which, by the way, and the English Government has got the statistic for the UK itself. Slum landlords account for 0.005% of the whole population of landlords in the whole of the UK.
They're the ones that you see on it's all those landlords and situations that you see on the TV, and that's why it's commercialised like that. But
what about Section 13 notices in England and Wales then?
Yeah, so obviously, as you say about England and Scotland do things differently. So the Section 13 notice in England is for rent reviews. So in England and Wales, if you wish to increase the rent, the initial assured short-hold tenancy term must have ended, and you must serve the tenants with a Section 13 at least 1 month before the rent is due to be risen. All right, so that's different.
That's a bit different from where we are. We have to take 3 months, don't we?
Yeah, so here in Scotland, you're allowed to increase the rent. Obviously, typically it'll be a private residential tenancy. There is still some short assured, but once a year on the PRT, and you must give at least 3 months notice. And these, there's currently obviously the moratorium on rent increases and things, and that is running to the 31st of March at the moment. And then obviously, like I say, 1st of April, we're allowed to do that. But there's obviously the situation with it could only be 3% or 6% if you could then justify that you need to do a higher rent increase because of maybe costs involved, which would be your interest rates or insurance, or maybe you've got factoring fees in a building or things that have went up. But you need to be able to obviously demonstrate that to do this.
I could be very cynical here and say that the Scottish Government has basically allowed the freeze on rent to be lifted from the 1st of April because they realised that the legal challenge at the Scottish Association of Landlords are taken for the judicial review against the legislation potentially might be successful for getting the legislation thrown out because it is too encumbrant. And that's why they've decided to then say from the 1st of April, we're not going to actually freeze the rent anymore. We're going to allow you to increase it. so we're just going to put a cap on it. See how that's done. I think they've actually, because it just so happens they rushed John Blackwood in from Sal 2 days after obviously I had pushed the issue with them, and then also after that was filed in the court for a judicial review to see if we could actually get it. So I actually think this is their way of trying to head it off a bit by just slightly changing what they're doing in order to just sneak through and that judicial review not to go ahead.
Yeah, it kind of alleviates the pressure on them, or they feel like doing it that way alleviates the pressure on them. Yeah,
they're no daft. They've got piles of lawyers. You know, we're just one person and a few resources at our hands, but they've got battalions of lawyers and solicitors and all the rest of it behind them. They're paid to do that job. Whereas we don't have that. We're just people, laymen and laywomen, and we don't really know much at all. And we have to rely on piecing things together and coming together to have some sort of fund in order to challenge us legally, because it takes money to do it. So this is why Sal was going to kick this off. But if it's going to go to judicial review and it's allowed to go through, then what's going to happen out of that is Sal's going to have to try and raise some money from us as a landlord community. And I'll tell you what, that's no easy. Because I've done this before. We've been here before when we had direct payment to tenants, and it was challenged by the NLA, the National Landlord Association, and the legal costs almost brought them to their knees, to financial ruin, because the government thought, we'll just keep appealing it. And it's like, they'll still have to pay. We've got people we're paid every day in our employment. So what do we care? It's money we've spent anyway. We'll just waste all their money. And that's literally why the National Landlord Association had to merge with the NFRLL, which is the National Residential Landlords Association. So the two had to merge together because they just couldn't survive financially, actually, with challenging. And then they learned, David at the time, who was the chairman, learned at that time that you're better actually to get some sort of concessions, and you're better to work with the government than actually fight them, because fighting costs a lot of money to do. So it's great for people to go, but when I rally the troops and I get out there and I put a post on, everybody goes, we should get them. And it's like, aye, but are you going to put your hand in your pocket? No, I'm not putting my hand in my pocket. That's for you to do. It's like, well, we're not getting them in, are we? So shut your mug. And don't say anything ever again then if you're not prepared to stand up and be counted. Everybody's great to have an opinion, aren't they? They're all there to have an opinion.
I love that. Shut your mug. I've not heard that.
When it comes to the crunch about marching forward and saying, right, let's do this, let's get them. Oh, I'm not really sure about that. Anyway, I digress. Let's carry on.
I know. Yeah, so obviously, and rent reviews, of course, not all landlords increase rents to their maximum point on a yearly basis, like we just covered, particularly if they have good tenants and they want to keep them in place and things. At the same time, most tenants, they will accept the fact that rents do go up, and realistic increases are generally not seen as unfair and far less hassle, and it's less costly for them to move home
again. That's the trade-off. That's a trade-off. It's you've got to work out whether the pain of someone staying financially is less than the pain of them moving financially. And if that's the case, then they will stay regardless if it's causing them pain, because the pain of moving is a lot greater. People will do things more to avoid pain than they will to have pleasure. I'll guarantee you that. Because most people are pushed by their circumstances. They're not pulled by their dreams. I could take a straw poll right now and I'll probably prove that. So this is what we're going to talk about in the Wealth Creation Show at 12:30 on Monday, aren't we, Richard? Yeah. We're going to talk about rent reviews. We're going to talk about how important it is, obviously, to de-risk your property investment and how that would start in the beginning, and if buy-to-let is still viable for that reason. So we're going to do practical examples. We're going to search the internet. We're going to find properties. We're going to do them. We're going to put them in. We're going to talk about the rent levels. We're going to find out what the mortgage rates are. We're going to find out what the ADS is 6%. What the mortgage rates. We're going to plug that in. Then we're going to financially model. We're going to model this and tell people if buy-to-let is still worth it, and what sort of prices you should be looking to pay for property, depending on what the other factors in the equation are, and where your degrees of tolerance are as well, in comparison to to what everybody else's degree of tolerance is. And what I mean is, when I originally started in buy-to-let, I had to make sure 30 years ago that I was clearing at least £250 in cash after the mortgage was paid.
Yeah.
And also a 25% return on capital. That was my criteria. If it didn't meet these two criteria, I would not invest in a property. And often it would come down to the difference of £100 or £200, whether I bought a property or not. And literally, in hindsight, I could kick myself because I could have done another 300 properties. But hey, hindsight's a great thing, and I'm where I am, and I'm happy.
Yeah. But yeah, that'll be a good, and it'll be quite an interactive show on Monday. So yeah, tune into that. But
can I then talk about understanding yields and growth then?
Yeah.
And just cover that now. You should keep a regular eye on what's the ongoing performance of your rental property to get the most from your investment. That's key here. Don't just leave it to chance. I know you've got a letting agent, but don't just leave it to chance, because sometimes your letting agent might not be on the ball as quick as you are. Although gross yields are usually quoted in adverts, the figures to focus on when projecting income and profit and loss are net yields and capital growth. Now, what I mean by that is let's explain what gross yield is in the beginning.
Yeah.
The gross yield is the annual rent expressed as a percentage of the purchase price. So if it's £6,000 a year rent, if it's a £100,000 property, the gross yield is 6%. And that's how you should actually do it. And this tends to increase over time as rents rise, because the price that you bought it for is still the same. However, you can still measure this on return on investment like you do in capital returns, like businesses do. Then, because if the property goes up to 150,000, you're still generating only maybe 7,000 in rent. Your gross yield is dropped, hasn't it? You know that your gross yield is dropped, because it should be 9,000 for your rent now if your property is 150,000 in order to have the right return. So that's when you can say, okay, is it really worth continuing to invest in that property, or should I look for another type of property, or should I actually sell that completely because I've now got a 50,000 gain in there, and what the implications of capital gain tax, and then actually invest that money in somewhere else? It would actually make that. Let's cover the net yield. This is the figure that actually tells you the real profit of your rental property. This is key, because it considers all your costs like the mortgage, maintenance and repairs before working out the percentage, okay? But simply deduct these from your income and divide by the remainder by the purchase price, and that gets your net yield. But there's one key other yield in between there, between the net yield, which is bottom line, return on what you've invested against what you're actually returning. So in other words, if you've only put £25,000 in and the rest is financed by the bank, and you're making £1,000 at the end of it, then it's in profit, net profit, then it's 1,000 divided by 25,000 to get your return. It's not 1,000 divided by the purchase price, because you've only got 25,000 in. That's what net yield is. There's one in between though, which is key in the factor for most people that will get buy-to-let mortgages. The gross yield, if you're getting a buy-to-let mortgage, gross yield is completely irrelevant. Yeah. Anybody that talks to you about that is talking rubbish. They have no idea what they're talking about. If a mortgage,
it's only relevant if you're doing a cash purchase, basically.
So the net yield after mortgage, or the gross yield after mortgage, make it easy because it will confuse people with net yield. The gross yield after the mortgage is paid is the key indicator here. So in other words, if you're earning £6,000 in rent and it's £3,000 in mortgage, then it's £3,000 that you're getting in return against your investment about the money that you've put in. So £3,000 divided by 25,000 I would have in as my 25,000 deposit. So 3,000 divided by 25 is my real return instead of gross yield. So it's gross yield after mortgage costs. Yes. That's the key factor if you're getting a mortgage finance. That's the one you look at, not the gross yield. Then the net yield's important. So it's that one, gross yield after mortgage costs, and then it's net yield. Okay, gross yield after mortgage costs, just to again emphasize to people, it's the amount, the rent minus the mortgage, minus the interest on the mortgage, not the capital repayment on the mortgage, interest only on the mortgage. That's the total, and then divide that by what the money you've actually put in. Just exactly what I did with the net yield, but just before the overheads are taken off. Yeah. Overheads are insurance, council tax, gas, electricity, maintenance and repairs, things like that, running costs, phones, cars, travel, petrol, insurance.
Yeah, all those kind of expenses, yeah.
Okay. Capital growth is another key indicator here. As the property increases in value, the capital growth is the amount that the price increase is expressed as a percentage. So the price increase from, say, 100,000 to 110,000 represents a 10% capital growth. And landlords often use this extra equity to fund a deposit for another rental property. I mean, there's no surprise. And you know, I'm quite happy to say this. I'm getting 1.9 million from the bank, and it's 100% their financing. How is that possible? I'll tell you in the Wealth Creation Show at 12:30. 100% financing from the bank at 1.9 million. And I'll tell you how I did it on the Wealth Creation Show at 12:30 on Monday. Remind me, Richard.
Yeah, I will.
But how is that possible to get that? And everybody says, I'll never get that from the bank. And it's like, nah, no bother. We'll give you it. 100% funded. Just like that. That tells you a lot. So that's your capital growth. So it's good practice to review your yields of your rental property every year and to check if there's anything you can do to improve its performance. Tax. Who wants to cover tax? I know I'm doing it, by the way. So you'll have to let me talk if you're going to cover tax. Who would like to cover tax?
Yeah. So, I mean, tax legislation for lettings has changed quite a bit. And over the past few years, and obviously if you're a landlord investor, you'll be well aware of that. And it's left some landlords and would-be investors confused about what expenses they can and can't claim. And so here we'll do a quick rundown, I think, of what things you need to know about tax, obviously. There is quite a lot involved in tax, and some people do shy away from it because maybe they don't understand it that great. And it does kind of confuse a lot of landlord investors. But firstly, obviously, like tax relief. So since 2020, the amount you could claim back against any mortgage secured on your rental property is fixed at 20% of the interest payments. Sorry?
Section 24 now of the Finance Act. Now remember, that's only if it's in your name, your property. It isn't. It's fully deductible if you're in a limited company.
Limited,
so if you've got 70,000, 80,000 pounds worth of interest on your mortgages, if you're in a limited company, it's completely deductible against your revenue. If you've got it in your own name, you will have to be you will have to earn 80,000 pounds, by the way, before you actually get that money off. So you'll be taxed on 80,000 first, and then you'll be given 20% of 80,000 mortgage interest payments off of that final bill. So some of your revenue, this is where some of your revenue will be higher taxed than the higher rate. You're only getting 20% off. So you will face a tax bill without actually earning any money at all. Now, I know that because I was a test case for the Treasury Select Committee. And the fact that at the time when it was introduced, when they says they were going to do it, I worked out my scenario in my portfolio currently as it is, and I've restructured the whole thing now, so I'm fine. I worked out the scenario with my portfolio as it was, and I was due to face a tax bill of £7,000 every single year, even though I made no money at all in buy-to-let. It's like, that's crazy, eh? But it was what it was, and that's hindsight. What's the sort of next ones you've got to think about then?
Yeah, as I say, there obviously people aren't quite sure about their allowable expenses. So, like the costs you can deduct from your income on your tax return, including things like repairs and safety checks and agent and accountant's fees and references and inventories and all things like that. Check the full list on the government website if you're unsure. But there is a lot of tax deductible expenses that are there. And then obviously you've got capital expenses. So improvements and upgrades to your rental property, including modernisation and major renovations, are classed as capital expenses and are not tax deductible. So it's like things that are...
This is a fine line, Richard. Yeah. Let me advise, because I've just talked about this. I know you know a bit about this. However, I've just talked to the accountant about it because I'm going through it myself. I have a concern, and I've always been led to believe, as an accountant myself, and I know this, the legislation says that if it's on the initial purchase, before the tenants moved in, and you do a major upgrade to the property, you're supposed to capitalise this, and you're not allowed to deduct it against your revenue.
Yeah. And
yet my accountant is now saying, no, it's allowable. And I'm like, I still need to investigate that a bit further.
I was just going to say,
yeah, I still have to investigate that a bit further. But when your tenant is in the property and you decide, or in between tenancies, because you've rented it for a while, like I'm doing just now with one of my properties, my 3-bedroom flat.
Yeah.
It's going to be £20,000 worth of refurbishments. I bought the flat for about 12 grand. so most people would say, why do you just throw the flat away? No, never. Obviously, it's earning quite a bit of revenue over the years. It has over the last 30 years I've had it. So you can see when I bought it, it was a lot less. But it's going to cost about £20,000 in refurbishments. But that is completely fully deductible, because all I'm doing is I'm replacing the heating system, I'm replacing the kitchen, I'm replacing the bathroom, I'm replacing the windows that were there already, and I'm carpeting and decorating it. So every single penny of that is deductible against my revenues of that year. Now it's a great opportunity just before the tax year ended right now, which is the 31st of March, or technically, by the way, it's the 5th of April. So if you miss the 31st of March, you can still do it before the 5th of April to actually do all these refurbishments in order to bring your tax down for this year. And now it's only a delay tactic, because the reality is all you're doing is kicking the can down the road to pay the higher tax bill for next year. But if you've got a high tax bill for this year and it brings you down to a lower banding rate of tax, therefore, that's why you should probably do it. Now, unfortunately, I had a huge payout for the insurance company last year, and I ended up missing that opportunity, and I got taxed, £10,000 in tax, and I was a bit green.
So would I.
Now, you know why I was a bit green? Because it's like I could have avoided it if I had done proper planning, and I just forgot. I missed that completely, because I planned everything else, but I didn't realise this huge revenue coming in from the insurance company for loss of rent for the last 4 years was going to hit my bottom line and affect us like that. So we got nailed for that tax, and we got caught out with a high rate tax band and the lower rate deduction, because it was in Elaine's name. It was a self-employed company. Whereas my other limited companies, we don't get caught out with that at all. It's just proper tax planning to come from one area to the next. So tax planning is essential, and capital expenses are essential, but most is deductible nowadays. It's very, very rare you'll actually get anything that's classed as capital expenses, unless you put things like, I put an extension on my house. If you put an extension, or you go upstairs and you extend into the attic, that's capital improvements.
Yeah.
Because you're not doing like for like anymore. You're not replacing like for like. You're not replacing a kitchen for a kitchen. You're actually extending the property and actually adding total value to the property itself. And that's why that is classed as capital expenses. And they are not deductible. They're only deductible when you sell the property. So when improvements are incidental to repair, the lines can be blurred to qualify these for these allowable expenses. And as I said, examples like the double glazing. If you've got single glazing, you're placing
double glazing is a good example we use.
It's perfectly acceptable. You can deduct that straight away, because the revenue accepts. And I was the test case for that. Actually, they ended up having to pay me £1,000 tax back when they found out I'd done £30,000 worth of improvements for double glazing, and it was way back when it just changed. And they then said, no, we need to give you that back, and you can deduct it immediately. So we'll have to hand you back £1,000 in tax. And I've never had a visit from a revenue inspector ever again.
Never come back.
Touch wood.
The double glazing thing is a good example, because obviously if you're going for the single or the double, they accept it as, although it's betterment and things, it's a minimum standard.
So how do we get our properties back then?
Yeah.
This is the thing. And, when you've got your property and you want to regain possession, how do you get it back?
Yeah. So Karen, do you want to run through that?
Yep, so if you want to regain possession of your rental property, getting the paperwork right is essential to minimising the risk of complications and delays. Now, we'll stress that as such an important thing. There are different ways of serving notice depending on whether you want your rental property back in the UK, and these include Section 21 notice in England and Wales. So you can serve a Section 21 notice, also known as a no-fault notice, anytime either at the end of the initial fixed term or break clause date. This has to be at least 2 months' notice is required, and you must have protected the security deposit.
Yeah, so it's different in England.
What's a Section 8 then? What is that? Because I think that's some sort of legal thing.
Yeah, so Section 8 also applies in England and Wales. So if you have a legal reason to end the tenancy, like serious rent arrears, damage, or illegal behaviour, you can serve a Section 8 notice at any time. So the notice period is just 14 days in these circumstances.
And you can serve the notice, but you still have to go for possession if the tenant refuses to leave.
Yeah.
And you have to make sure you have your grounds And obviously, for example, antisocial behaviour would be one of these, but you can't just say there's been antisocial behaviour, you have to have evidence of this. So for example, like crime reference numbers, you have to like support your reasons to do so, basically.
This is you're literally going to court, and you have to prove to the court, the sheriff, or the judge, depending on where you are, that it's presiding over it. You have to convince them that you've got all the evidence that it tells that story. If this is just supposition and hearsay, then that's not going to fly. Definitely not. How could you do accelerated proceeding for evictions then in England and Wales?
So obviously in England and Wales, you can do this if your tenants refuse to leave. So you need to start the eviction process, which can be lengthy and costly. However, with the Section 21 notice, and if you're not claiming any rent arrears, so not claiming, you can apply for an accelerated procedure. So this doesn't require a court hearing.
So it's a quicker way to do it in that process. Now, out of this though, the one thing I should tell everybody is make sure you get it right. If you get one thing wrong, and I mean one thing wrong, like the ish date.
Yes.
Now you can be confused. The ish date is the point where the tenancy started. So if you want to serve a notice under short assured tenancies, if you don't get the ish date right, say for example, it's the 2nd of the month. The ish date is the 2nd of the month. So if you want to give somebody 2 months notice and you hit the 3rd of the month when you give them 2 months notice, you have to wait till the ish date on the 2nd and then serve 2 months notice from there. So you've effectively got 3 months to run because you have to get the ish date. If you don't get that right in a short assured tenancy, it gets thrown out of court and you have to start again. So that's key. You have to get that right. Hence the reason why I don't leave it to chance anymore and I go straight to a solicitor to do all that process for me.
Yeah.
I do not want to get involved in that. TC Young were on the other side defending tenants, and they're now helping us as landlords in Scotland and advising for the judicial review. But TC Young knows all these pitfalls and actually is able to educate us as landlords on what we should watch out for if you do want to do it yourself. But then it just tells me it's like get a professional to do it. By the time I've worked this out, I've lost a fortune in my time.
Yeah,
and I don't want to do that.
Circumstances, obviously, when we don't have the moratoriums in place, there has been such a shift from obviously serving notice on short assured tenancies to private residential tenancies.
Yeah.
So obviously notice to leave in Scotland now, north of the border, there's a list of 18 valid grounds to end the tenancy. So beforehand, a landlord could serve notice because they wanted to, but now on the private residential tenancies, they have to have one of these 18 reasons to do so.
Yeah.
You cannot just serve notice because you don't like your tenants, basically.
And a lot of them are actually a lot of them are now discretionary. In other words, they're not mandatory grounds anymore. So the judge can decide based on the story you tell them whether they should evict or not. Whereas mandatory before used to go, no, they're definitely 3 months in rent arrears. Mandatory, right, you're out. I can't do anything about it. Now it's kind of a discretionary thing. So that's why it's so important to get somebody that understands the legislation as it stands right now. So what about notice from tenants and you and all the rest of it? What should that be, Karen?
So under private residential tenancies, there's a different set of notice timescales now. So you must give your tenants 28 days notice to leave if the tenancy has run for 6 months or less. So once you surpass that 6 months, you're looking at 84 days notice that you have to serve the tenant. And like I say, you have to have a ground for doing
Which is 3 months, 84 days. Yeah.
So, you can go to the First Tier Tribunal in Scotland to begin the eviction process. You must apply for an eviction order from the First Tier Tribunal.
Yeah.
You must also notify your local authority when you serve the notice. Nobody knows about that.
Yeah.
And it's a wee get out of jail card for the tribunal to actually avoid it. And if a solicitor understands for the tenant side, they could actually defend that. If you've not told or updated the local authority that you're actually serving notice on a tenant, then actually you've done wrong. You've actually wrongfully evicted. You're doing the wrong process. Some for a period of time have overlooked it. They've just let it go. The tribunal's agreed and they've gone. But just now we've come across it once where the tribunal's gone back and goes, so when did you send a letter to the local authority? But we were clearly able to demonstrate we'd actually engaged with the local authority anyway and actually got them on board to help the tenant resolve their situation, which they actually didn't. And so there was mitigating circumstances where they went, yeah, we're okay with that then. Just go and serve it so we know it's been done.
Yeah, you need to be careful.
Yeah, like I say, there is obviously the wrongful termination order in Scotland. So if your tenant feels that they've been misled into leaving, they can apply for a wrongful termination order. So this carries a penalty for up to 6 months worth of rent. So they advise not doing it. So an example of this would be telling the tenants you intend to sell the property, but in an actual fact you are reletting the property to somebody else.
That's a big no-no, and I've seen people try to do that, and obviously we've advised them otherwise, but that's happened over the years. People think
The
that's
tribunal checks.
Oh yeah, of course.
Goes back and checks in these situations, and you will get caught, and it will come back to haunt you. Definitely.
I think it's important, though, the detail, Karen, as well, even down to the spelling of things in your paperwork. If your paperwork's not right, you've got a problem.
Some of the most notorious tenants in Fife have actually been kept in their properties by landlords misspelling the notice.
Yeah.
And just a date wrong, a misspelling wrong, the name wrong, the pronunciation wrong, and they've actually been able to keep them in their tenancy. That's what they were there to do. This is TC Young again. And then, therefore, it got thrown out of court, and they had to start the whole process over again because they'd done that wrong. A spelling mistake. I mean, you'd think that would just be, that's fine. But the legislation clearly says it has to be done properly, or you have to go back to the beginning. So, to avoid being invalidated, your notice must include the tenant's name, the full address, the property, the date, the notice period ends, and all spelled correctly. You must also have supplied your tenants with a tenancy agreement and valid safety certificates. A classic. That's why we've got Patrick Harvey so draconian right now, because his landlord basically didn't give him a tenancy agreement. When he fell on hard times, lost his job, his landlord still refused to give him a tenancy agreement. He therefore couldn't claim housing benefit. He couldn't pay his rent. The landlord evicted him, and he's taken that vengeance on us right now for that very reason. This is a vendetta and vengefulness and revenge against every private landlord, because this one person was basically, a rogue landlord, which is 0.005% of the population of landlords. And we're having to pay for that price now because of his experience. Final thoughts on this, Karen?
Make sure you get your spelling right.
It's honestly something that you would be so surprised that happens quite a lot.
There's a lot involved in this. So obviously, for all the topics that we've covered today, even throughout the years, the legislation is constantly changing. Landlords are under constant new pressure. So making sure that you're speaking to the right people is always going to be my advice on it.
Yeah.
Get knowledge is power. Knowledge is money in this case as well. So protect your investment by making sure that you're in the know and what you're doing.
Yeah.
Richard, what's your final thoughts on this before we actually take questions?
And things. Yeah, I think that it's really important to do those checks, not just on your tenants and the property, but your actual investment itself. Like you say, obviously, Jim, reviewing its situation financially and things as well, and protecting your investment as a whole. Things can get quite difficult, especially when it comes to if you do notice that notice on properties and things. It can be a bit difficult, and tenants and landlords could be a bit confused about how to do that properly. My email and contact details are in the post. If you're ever unsure or having difficulty, please feel free to contact me.
Absolutely. And for the people on TikTok and Instagram, just contact Fife Properties, and Richard will be able to give you some advice and some help and some support. I mean, I know we're Fife, but technically, I used to be the chairman of the National Landlord Association in Scotland. So I actually run their helpline as well for all the Scottish landlords. I was their helpline. That was the helpline that all the Scottish landlords phoned. So the knowledge and expertise that I've gained over the years and how to do things and how to understand things on a commercial platform as well is priceless, I would say. I don't. It's not big up myself. It's the very fact that I don't know anybody else with the amount of knowledge and expertise that I've gained over the years, and I've actually been in it that long, and are still quite an active investor. So that's us. Thanks very much for coming on the show. We're going to take questions now, and then we'll just do that. So let's just cover a couple of things. Massey actually says on here, I will put up 3% now in every year, regardless, mainly because we are way under the going rate roundabout. Yeah, Massey, I can't decry that, in the fact that you have to protect your investment. You don't know what the Scottish Government's going to do. They might actually put a permanent rent cap on, therefore you can't increase it. Therefore, you're going to be left vulnerable with your costs far outweighing the income coming in. And that then leaves the tenant vulnerable in a situation. And nobody wants to see that, where you can't look after the tenant because you don't have enough resources or money to actually do that, because you've tried to do the right thing yourself and actually, keep the rent as low as possible, knowing that if you need to increase it, then you'll be able to come to a compromise with the tenant and that'll be okay. But now you're getting forced into a position that you know that you might not be able to increase it at all. Then you have to do that, I would say.
Yeah.
Let's cover TikTok.
So you got TikTok questions?
Let's see if I've got anything on TikTok. We do have a couple of things on here. Yeah, hey, hi, hey, yep. Somebody actually said there about kitchens and bathrooms will be capital improvements, surely. No, they're not. Kitchens and bathrooms, if you're replacing like for like, are not capital improvements. Yes, they will add value to your property, but the revenue looks at it on the principle that if you're replacing a kitchen with a kitchen and a bathroom with a bathroom, then it's just replacing like for like. Therefore, it's instantly deductible against your profits in the year. As well as you can have accruals and prepayments, remember. So if you've got work to do and you're at the end of the year, for example, now I'll explain, because I'm in accountancy world, this is how we think in accountants, and it's perfectly legal to do this in terms of tax planning. If you in month 1 or 2 after the end of the tax year, so for in April and May, you then end up having to spend about £20,000 or £30,000 on repairs and improvements, or even £2,000 or £3,000 on repair improvements, and you were due to do that in the year before, the tax year before, and it was needing done, and it just because the contractor wasn't there to do it at the time because of their timeline, then you can accrue that cost into the year before for your tax. So you can accrue it into the year before and say that's an accrual. Okay, that's the amount I've spent, in the first couple of months of the next tax year. Because it took a wee bit longer than usual, but that's the bill I got and we started the job at that time, and it's crossed over. You can accrue that bill into the year before if you want to. It just means that you're taking maybe £5,000, you're offsetting against your revenue for that year, for the year before. You're maybe bringing your tax bill down, but it means you're going to have to write it back though when you actually put it into the next year, because your accrual has to then be written back for the next year, and therefore that cost won't be deductible the next year, and your profits might be even higher. So you've got to kind of plan where you want to be, whether you want to actually accrue it or whether you want to actually just let it go in the next tax year because there's more advantage and you think you're going to earn more revenue in there. So it's kind of forecasting, a bit of planning at the same time. But to answer your question in a nutshell, bathrooms and kitchens are instantly deductible for that reason. And I do believe I'm probably going to get to the point where I'm actually going to tell you that even though before the tenant moves in, the deductible as well. But we'll get more insight on that.
Just going to say, it'll be interesting to find out, Jim.
Yeah, definitely. I think so. It'll be interesting to find that out. Okay, quick one as well from Carrie. Other ways to prove antisocial behaviour?
That's the notice, yeah. I mean, at the moment, if you could prove antisocial behaviour, and if you do have that problem, it is the easiest way to end a tenancy. But you do have to really back it up. Like Karen says, you need crime reference numbers. You'll need, obviously, a log of what's been going on. You'll need a witness statement or the neighbours or something. There is a lot you need to prove antisocial to be able to do an antisocial notice.
Personally, for me, in order to prove antisocial behaviour, I think you really have to take the same tact as what the council do. They actually give a 14-day journal to a template journal to their existing tenant or the existing owner. It's arguing about their antisocial behaviour and saying, can you fill that log out so I can get clear evidence that there's problems? Because you might not, nobody wants to get the police involved, because we don't want to do that. We want to get on with our neighbours. But on times, there is times like this where you have to try and prove this. This is how you get neighbours from hell and, landlords from whatever it is that Paul Champolina does on Channel 5. But you have to prove antisocial behaviour beyond a shadow of a doubt. If it's one person, the next door neighbour, with a journal, you're not going to get anywhere. You're not going to fly anywhere with that. You've had it. You have to get probably the antisocial behaviour team at the council involved as well. But then they'll do the same thing. They'll say, we'll give you a 14-day journal, get the next door neighbour to fill that out, or whoever it is experiencing antisocial behaviour, and then send it back to us, and then we will do that. Now, at that point, you often get, and this is where the pain of doing it versus the pain of leaving it, it has to be greater. you often get most of the people actually complaining about that antisocial behaviour going, oh, I can't be bothered. Now, if you can't be bothered filling in a 14-day
It can't be that bad.
It can't be that bad. It must just be you bleating about it for the sake of it, because you've fallen out with the neighbour because they're not going to do their garden like you'd like to have them done it.
Yeah.
That's what usually happens. It's like, my garden's manicured. Your garden should be manicured as well.
Yeah, the expectation.
That's what typically happens with antisocial behaviour. They then put their own beliefs about how they live should be on their next door neighbour. The next door neighbour's not antisocial behaviour under the law at all, but they just don't like the fact that they're not like them. That's it. And plus the fact that they rent a property.
Yeah, the stigma of that for some
people out there like that, that are so way back in the 1900s that they actually look down on someone because they rent their property. Well, Grant Cardone, the billionaire, almost billionaire, rents his property. I don't think I'd be looking down on him.
No.
And I think Kiyosaki rents his property. I think Richard Branson probably rents his property. I don't think actually Richard Branson owns any property at all. I think he actually rents everything and just lives everywhere based on his work pattern, because he has areas in different places. I don't think he owns anything at all. I think it's all the companies that own it. Hence the reason why they rent them all is holiday lets and places to visit and all the rest of it. I think these are all clever ways of tax planning, let's say. Very efficient and clever ways of doing it. Yeah. And that's it. I think that's us. We've got all the different things. Oh, here we go. We've got a quick one here. What if you're single and vulnerable, disabled, too scared to do anything about it? Any help? It's really talking to the local authority. The local authority is really good. Your antisocial behaviour team at your local authority is absolutely excellent. Remember, the landlord is not the police. They don't have the police powers. So don't expect the landlord to do what the police would do normally in that situation. But you do have an antisocial behaviour team at every single local authority. So you should speak to them first on what their advice would be. And then what would happen is, rather than go to the landlord and do this, then what would happen in the antisocial behaviour team, they'll go to the landlord. And the antisocial behaviour team is probably going to have more success if there is a real problem with the landlord than you are going to have.
Because there's a lot more clout in it.
Yeah, it becomes a knocking of heads. That's all, really. And I'm going to make you. And it's like, no, you're no. And where the local authority goes, you've got to comply with that legislation, that legislation, that legislation, that legislation. At this point in time, you're not complying with this, that, and that. Get it sorted. That's where local authority is in that situation, if that is the case. So your best advice, if you're vulnerable, disabled, you don't want to speak to the neighbour, ideally you should speak to your neighbour and say, any chance you can keep the noise down after 11 o'clock and within tolerance. But if you're afraid to do that, I know that's an issue with yourself most of the time for most people. They're afraid. What if they fight me? What if they start having hassle? What if I fall out with them? Well, you're going to fall out with them anyway. But you've fallen out with them already, haven't you? You've just not notified them yet. Look at it that way. You've fallen out with them already because you've not notified them, but you've fallen out with them because that's why you're going on about their antisocial behaviour. So you may as well just go to the council and to the antisocial behaviour team and explain to them. They will then give you the diary and the right information to do that. And then you can then report on it after that. And then they will decide if they need to take it any further by speaking to the landlord or speaking to the tenant. They have the powers that we don't. Plus the fact that the landlord then says, look, that's great, because in my occasion, I just want to evict these people that are really antisocial because I don't like them either. And I don't like the way they behave. But I've got no power to do that as a landlord unless I have that information. And it has to be externally verified by somebody that's credible, and that's where your antisocial behaviour team comes in. And your police come in. They could tick all these boxes. And when you go, if I go for an eviction then, and I appear in court, and we appear in court to get the eviction at a tribunal, and the solicitor comes up, the judge immediately says, or the sheriff says, show me the evidence. External evidence, not your hearsay and speculation.
Yeah, you need
I just didn't like them. It's like, that's not good enough. No, this is what the police said. This is their report. This is what the antisocial behaviour team at the council said. Job done. Eviction order granted. Everybody's happy. Landlord's delighted because they've got rid of antisocial tenant. The next door neighbour's delighted because they've got rid of antisocial tenant as well. And the next time we're more vigilant because you can't get them all. Some are really good, and some actually fall by the wayside once they've moved in.
Yeah,
we have that, haven't we? Their entourage comes with them.
Yeah,
it's like they move in. Butter wouldn't melt in their mouth. Absolutely. This is few and far between, remember, I'm talking
Just
about.
going to say, we'll stress that that's worst case scenario, and it doesn't
People hear
happen.
horror stories and go, I can't invest in property. They hear horror stories about that, but this is few and far between this happens. This is very rare. But the reality is, we want rid of them as well, as much as you want rid of them, because we don't want to do that. And some people will slip through the net, but it's the entourage that joins them later on, and their life, it changes. Because some people just let life happen to them than let life happen for them.
Mm-hmm.
And the people that let life happen to them actually end up in situations where they can't control what's going on around them. And that's generally what causes antisocial behaviour in the first place. So I hope that helps to answer your question.
No, that was some good advice, Jim. Definitely.
Yeah. Problem is, it's their word against you as well. Hopefully, I've explained that, Fifer. Hopefully, I've explained that it's not. It's it's not really your word against theirs if you do the proper procedure.
If you involve the right people,
and everybody like that. Job done. Eviction order granted. Everybody's happy. Win-win situation. Landlords and letting agents want tenants and properties that will look after them, not be antisocial, and pay their rent on time. That's all they want. And then they'll bend over backwards. They'll do all the repairs and improvements. They'll do everything they need to do to keep and sustain a long-term tenancy and get a decent return on their investment. And that's all they want. Long-term, medium to long-term investment, property management is, and property investment is. And hopefully that's helped you. Thanks very much for all your questions. If you've got any questions later on, please feel free to ask everyone else. And until next time, guys, at the Wealth Creation Show at 12:30 on Monday.
Just going to plug that 12:30 Monday, and
12:30 Monday. We're going to be talking about this even more, going into full detail about buy to let is still really worth it.
Brilliant. And
I'll prove one way or the other. We'll argue that case. I still don't know myself, so it's a learning curve for me with everything changing all around about us. And until next time, guys, it's bye-bye from Fife Properties TV.
Thanks, Jim.